Good morning, Barbara. Thank you so much, Barbara. And thank you for keeping in touch with me and all of your help over the year, and for that beautiful. I got these beautiful Blu-ray blockers glasses, the 3 pairs on Friday morning, and a game about St. Louis, like a trivia Monopoly game, and just made me feel really, really welcome, Barbara. And thanks so much. I was not at that event with Doug in 1993, just simply because he and I didn't know each other then. We got together in 2009, and I was telling the guys earlier today that the Fall Classic was actually the first time that Doug chose to drive me to the airport when he would, anyway, to get to the Fall Classic. And so he and I had been together about 3 weeks when I went to the Fall Classic. And I had just turned 20. I was 21 years sober, and he had just turned 22. And he likes you to know that he's 3 months longer sober than me. But I just tell him that they're man months, so we're really even. But only half the room ever likes that joke. So, so I just keep telling it. But thanks so much, Barbara. I do recognize you though, and it's just for a shorter time. And I want to thank Tommy for the invitation to come out here and share with you guys this morning. It's always a privilege to be able to do anything in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm glad that Josh has picked that baton up. And anytime I get voluntold in Alcoholics Anonymous to do a commitment, I consider it a gift. Early on, they told me I had to get out of myself. And while I really didn't understand what that all meant, when they point me to a little job or something that required my thinking of something or somebody other than myself, I was relieved for a little while until the steps could take root inside me. Those little jobs just really helped. I began to experience the lack of the noise on the inside of my own head. And so, it began to work even before the steps could take complete hold and clean me up and make me ready to carry the message. And, I've enjoyed the speakers all weekend. I wasn't able to get to all of them, but I got to hear Teresa, who is one of my favorites. She's just whip smart and joyful and enthusiastic and carries a strong message. And to hear Jeff yesterday morning, and Sam and Kelly Kay, who's cute and fun with depth and weight. I was just really, really impressed with her and the way she carried her experience and stuff. And it's funny how you think, when I saw the title of her talk, Minor Miracles, it's just so funny how we make stuff up in our heads before we can really know what's going on. I thought, minor miracles. Oh, she's going to tell a story about how a whole bunch of little miracles add up to one big one or something like that. Okay, that'll be fun. And then when I found out that it was minor miracles, people who got sober young, I thought, oh, that's even better. So, if you pay attention and you're willing to have your mind changed, who knows what we can learn. And of course, Harold is one of my favorites as well. I don't ever get tired of hearing Harold speak. And of course, he's off doing his Sunday morning thing as a pastor. It's busy day, so he couldn't be here. But I just delighted to get to spend that time with him last night. And so thank you. That brings us to this morning. And I couldn't get on to the earlier session, but I'm glad to be here now. So thank you. Thank you. I love the Fall Classic. It's a strong, you carry a strong message. I got to be there in person one time in 2009, and now virtually you help make a 2-dimensional format in dimensions, and I appreciate that. And lastly, I just really want to thank Mike McKay for your service. You just tireless. I see your face everywhere, and you I just never hear you get grumpy, and you may, but I never hear you. And you're just always there. So thank you so much for what you do for Alcoholics Anonymous. All of that said, I'm just delighted to be here, And it's going to be, they're predicting 117-degree weather today for us. And so it's a hot one. I'm so grateful for air conditioning. It's those little things. I'm not out there on the street trying to hide. I remember I was 19 years old, and we had been hitchhiking. We were out at the Colorado River just outside of Bullhead City, and we'd passed out next to the river, and we got up the next morning. We came to the next morning, and we were hitchhiking. I think we were trying to get to Tucson. I'm not sure, but I had shoes on, and I was so jumbled and so sick from the night before that I watched my shoes as I walked away from them in the middle of the desert on the way to Tucson in Arizona. And I think it was probably 115 degrees there too. So, it's just, I'm glad that it's not like that anymore. I'm glad I'm not like that anymore. I don't know why I'm an alcoholic. I'm just really glad to know that I am. I know what's wrong with me. I used to think it was my crazy, dark, dramatic, violent, perverted family. If you had my family, you drink too. But now I've been around a while, and I've seen a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds. My husband is one of those people who lived a charmed childhood. Nothing weird ever really outside ordinary happened to him when he was young. He grew up in a family that loved each other and sang together, and his father painted the family pickup truck the color of his high school. You know what I mean? It was that family, and just so sweet, and yet he sits next to me in the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. Why? Because alcohol did exactly foreign to him what it did foreign to me. I like a very uncomplicated definition of alcoholism. It keeps me on track, and it reminds me of what's at stake here. I think the best description of alcoholism that exists in our big book is on page 44 in the first paragraph, where it says, if when you honestly want to find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. Boom, there's the problem. And if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness that only a spiritual experience will conquer. Solution right there. I treat my mental and physical illness with a spiritual treatment, and I get better. I don't know why that is. I just know that it is. It's been my experience. And but I didn't know that for a long time. I'm somebody who I believed in a power greater than myself since I was a small child. I would lay in bed and try to consider the vastness of these concepts of God that I would hear, and sometimes they'd be a little scary. My mom had a little kind of a scary version of God, but I didn't necessarily have to buy into it, and I didn't. But I would consider this power, and it wasn't like my family didn't love each other, but we just, when things would blow up, we turned on each other. We didn't turn in, we blew up. And so I believed in this power for a long time. And but when a challenge would come down in our life, instead of turning to God, which seemed like it took a little bit too much time to get an answer from him, and it didn't always seem to work, when alcohol came along and started to do its stuff for me, I let it. I could say a prayer, or I could take a drink. And man, to tell you the truth, a drink was just so much quicker for a solution. It just worked right away, where I didn't have to sit around wondering what God's will was. I just took a drink and I was better right away. And so I allowed alcohol to become the great intervener, even though it turned out to be counterfeit, a real counterfeit power. It threw me away at the end. But for a long time, it created and preserved illusions that I lived by for a long, long time. It became my spirituality. It became my growing up muscle. It became the thing that made me feel buffered from you, and the thing that made me feel connected to you all at the same time. Why wouldn't I drink that? And, I know that there are people who come to Alcoholics Anonymous having lived, having built and lost great empires. That's not my story. I topped out at about 11 and a half and skittered across the bottom till I was 29. And when I got to you, I weighed 110 pounds. I had a distended liver. I felt like if you blew on me, I'd turn to dust. I was getting ready to lose my apartment again. I was getting ready to lose my daughter again. And And I had no hope. I was getting ready to drink through my circumstances one more time, because I thought it was circumstances that kept me drinking. And it was only till I got to AA that I found out that it's really not. The people I thought had harmed me so badly had been long out of my life, and I was still drinking and still mad. I didn't even see how I had felt so victimized when I got here, that I didn't see how I was victimizing those around me. And but that was a long come. I left home early. I started leaving home when I was 12. I just couldn't take it anymore, and I just had held on as long as I could. And it was I watched the things that I love leave, or said goodbye to the things that I loved, like my baby sister, who I got to take care of, who I loved so much. I knew my other sister would be okay. She'd go live with my dad, but my baby sister, I really was sad about. I watched I used to play championship softball, and little by little by little, it began to get in the way of my drinking. And so I said goodbye to that. I loved academics, said goodbye to those. I loved running track, said goodbye to that. And any friendships that I might have developed at an early age. I just started to find my hope out on the open road. It just seemed like my favorite place began to be somewhere other than here, and on my way to somewhere else. And consequently, because I was so young, I started ending up in some of the Southern California hotspots, like Indio Jail and Riverside Juvenile Hall and LA Central Juvenile Hall. And we did that whole dance for a while. And I was 14. I found myself in a place called North Beach in the San Francisco area, where my friend and I got one long ride all the way up there. I was always heading to San Francisco because that's where the power seemed to be. You know, I'm a child of the 60s. I grew up then, although the 60s were over by the time I got out in the world. I was 12 in 1960, but so I was a day late and a dollar short for that. But boy, I used to watch those people in the 60s, and I really admired what they had. They seemed to have a sense of power and unity and song and love that I just really wanted to experience, because my home life was so opposite to that, and it was violent and vile and degrading, and I just wanted to find a better place, and I ended up we're in San Francisco, and the guy dropped us off on this in this seedy little party town called North Beach. And I looked to my left, and there was Carol Doda and her flashing boobs in neon, and looked to my right, and there were hookers and dealers and pimps. Oh my. And a couple of guys approached us, offered us money for sex, and we said yes and did the next indicated thing, and boom, a whole new career path opened up for us. And I started living a day at a time in a way I've not had to live in a very, very long time. And Dr. Silkworth talks about this in the chapter, The Doctor's Opinion. He says that after a time, we can't differentiate the true from the false. After a while, our alcoholic lives seemed the only normal one. And it certainly seemed that way for me. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had already begun to trade away every God-given talent or gift or potential that I had for the effect that alcohol would produce. And if you had asked me back then, I would have said I was doing it willingly. It just seemed to be the next indicated thing. And I ended up being locked up. A year later, I was in a mental hospital. I was supposed to be there for 2 weeks, and I ended up being there for a year. I just sort of made myself at home and moved in. And again, our big book says that deep down inside every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. In the last analysis, it's only there he may be found. And even though I knew that it existed, I could never, ever create a sustained connection to that power. You know, and like I said, when things got rough, I take a drink and I'm okay right then. And when I was locked up in places like the mental hospital, I had to find another way to try to live. And I was always looking for the counterfeit. You know, I didn't understand that what I came looking for, I came looking with, that what I was looking for was already inside me. I was always looking out there for what I thought would fix me. And the trouble with that is I was always about half a bubble off what it was I thought I saw anyway. Like I'd mistake arrogance for confidence. I'd mistake sex for love. I'd mistake brute strength for strength of character. And I got it up in my hot little hands, and it would dissolve where I stood because it just wasn't it. I had to come to AA to learn that it's when I'm thinking of you, constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. That's what makes that illusion of separation disappear. And we're not the only ones who have that, but certainly alcohol made me feel like I had bridged that gap. and that I had the inside scoop on how to arrange that. But I didn't see all of this for a long time. I went from the girls unit to the co-ed unit to the unit where they put the patients they just don't know what to do with anymore. I turned sweet 16 in the nut house. And by the time I got to that last unit, I had casts on both my arms up to my shoulders because I'd been cutting, because that was just a different way of dealing with emotional release. I was no longer bathing or getting dressed, because you don't have to do that to date in the nut house. And somewhere along the line, I had begun to surrender to the thought that maybe I was just one of those little nut house lifers who got to get out every now and then, but I'm always going to end up back inside. Why? Because every time I hit the street, I'm right back doing the very thing that got me locked up in the first place. And I couldn't undo that on my own, couldn't even see it on my own. I'm still running on my best solution, and alcohol just seemed to solve so many problems all at once. And I ended up going over the wall and hopping in my boyfriend's car, who was waiting the other side of the fence for me to do that. I always find it amusing that I had a boyfriend who would sit on the other side of the nut house wall waiting for his girlfriend to climb up the chimney and over the gate and hop in his car and drive off into happy destiny. We lasted just about 2 weeks. I was 16, he was 22, and my probation officer, after 2 weeks, knew exactly where to find me, and it hurt my feelings to find out that he had called her, so I guess he'd had his fill too, come get her, she's right here. And I spent time in juvenile hall, and then a rehab at the state hospital, and then a girls' home at the end of that, and a foster home in between. And my dad used to say, I think they're just trying to buy you some time, Carla, and he might be right. I come from a family. Baby sister committed suicide at the age of 17. My baby brother died of drug addiction and alcoholism when he was 30. My mom died of end-stage liver disease just about 12 years ago. And my last remaining sibling lives in Wisconsin. And when she's not drinking, she's on the Vicodin maintenance diet. And none of that stuff made me alcoholic. It gave me an inventory. But somehow, some way, I was lucky enough to stay alive long enough to get to find you guys. And so maybe some of that stuff slowed down some of those places. And when I was in that mental hospital, they weren't talking to me a lot about alcoholism. They were talking to me about disorders. I was a very disordered looking child. I was alternately violent and withdrawn, and living with a level of frustration that I did not know how to talk about. In fact, it wasn't until I got to AA almost 15 years later that I heard a tape of who I now know as Cubby Selby talking about feeling like a scream, looking for a mouth. And I thought, oh my God, you guys know. And this was not a treatment center, it was a mental hospital. So a lot of my roommates had real illness, manic depression, real schizophrenia, the real thing. And those things above, beyond, and besides alcoholism, they are not the same thing. But when I have no booze and I have no steps or fellowship or God of my understanding, and I didn't even know about those at the time, I look a lot like them. And so it takes a little while to sort that out. So in the meantime, they were giving me daily nutritional supplements of Thorazine, Mellaril, Valium, down sleepers. I suppose they were concerned I wouldn't sleep. And then the drug rehab place treated just the opposite. It was an offshoot of the Synanon program, which had been doing very well at the time, and so they had an adolescent model that they were trying. And I ended up running away from the girls' home at the end of all of that, because on my way to somewhere else is where the hope is. And I don't know you, but I never went anywhere new thinking, let's go screw this up too. I always went somewhere new thinking, let's get a fresh start, a clean slate. We'll get this going and we'll do it right this time. And all of our friends had said, man, San Francisco's gone to seed. You got to go to Oregon where God might be, and I just knew those people from the 60s were going to be up in Oregon. We're going to get it right. We're going to start over and make it good. And we're going to get back to the land. And, I'm from Los Angeles, so I don't know what land I thought I was getting back to. But anyway, we went up there, and, two things happened while I was up there that I couldn't see while it was happening. And our book talks about this too. A lot of us showing signs of alcoholism long before we're ready, willing, or able to do anything about it. And certainly it was that way for me. There'd be days that we'd go without booze. I had no money, and I was a terrible thief. I'm trying to lay low. I don't want to go back to lock up. And so we'd go without booze. And when I had no booze and I had no steps or fellowship or God of my understanding, no sufficient substitute, I become restless, irritable, and discontent. My solution is gone. And when I could drink the way I needed to drink, I was always overshooting the mark. And that was happening again still at 17. my friends had to ask me to leave, and I was asked to leave a lot. And, I ended up back out on Hollywood Boulevard. I was 18 years old, starting my days off with a pint of pop-off vodka and just going wherever the day took me. And some days it was a party and some days it was surviving, and not a lot of hope about it getting any different. And I left Hollywood after about a year there, and I hooked up with another boyfriend from another rehab, because, that's where they keep the partners if you're looking. And again, our book talking about moral and philosophical convictions galore. I really wanted to live that life of peace and love and all of that stuff, but he and I just couldn't stop knocking out of each other really long enough to implement the principles fully of peace and love. So we beat each other up and down the California coast, and we pitched a tent in the mountains in Southern Oregon and lived there till the rains came. And then we ended up across town on top of another mountain in an old dilapidated log cabin that we patched up and threw a plastic tarp over the top, called it a skylight. And then the baby came. Our spiritual advisor lived up the hill in the plastic tent. And now we're drinking moonshine and homemade wine because it was organic and much better for you. Over and over and over and over, just trying, all of those things that they outline on the first page of the chapter 3. More about alcoholism. Everything, every imaginable remedy. And I didn't even know that it was alcoholism that I had. Who's an alcoholic? Alcoholism is so wimpy. It just seemed. Now I want to be a drug addict. Drug addicts are badass. And I'm more than willing to admit to that, but alcoholism, nah. And so I had this, then I got pregnant, and I was going to have this little girl, and something inside me thought, it's all going to be okay now. I'm going to be okay. And I had enough therapy to know that you got to break the cycle. You got to become the parent you never had, and moral and philosophical convictions galore, and I point us back to the book because it's where I got it. If you can find yourself in that book, not the language, in what happened in our relationship with alcohol, how for so long I couldn't live without it. And now, after all these years, since I was 9 months, there hasn't been one circumstance that has arisen where I thought that a drink was going to make any of this any better. And I hope I never take that for granted. The fact that the obsession to drink alcohol was finally lifted, that's a big one. And that certainly wasn't, I just thought back then it didn't even feel like an obsession. It just seemed like, you do it like breakfast. But so I got pregnant, and I thought, having this little girl, I'm going with the people that, I got to break the cycle. I want to become the parent I never had. And by that time, I was getting my clothes and shoes and the necessities of life out of a box behind a store in town. And I thought I was going to be a better parent than the one I had, because I was delusional. And my daughter got in the way of one of our fights when she was about 10 months old, and I had to take her up the road where it's got to be better somewhere else. And, up until then, I hadn't really been able to get out into the marketplace, into the workplace, and get a real job. I was just pretty sick, and the reentry was difficult for me. And so my first legitimate work was in the bar business, and it just seemed to me to be cosmically efficient. It never occurred to me not to drink on the job. Why else would you have that job? It just seemed to work perfectly for me. And I drugged that kid over 3 states, and we ended up back down here in a little town called Covina in Southern California. And I was renting a room from my aunt, and my daughter was almost 4 years old by then. And every afternoon I'd kiss her goodbye, and I'd take off from my new job in Hollywood as a bartender. And it was a great place to work. Nothing wrong with it. It was just me. I was a common denominator. And then I'd go to work. I'd pour drinks till the wee hours of the morning and start over again. And with a little stop on the way, always got thirsty about halfway there. And I'd pull into my favorite watering hole, have a couple of drinks, a couple of shots of Cuervo and a couple of Bud Backs, and then get up off the bar stool and head out to work. And I did that for months, until one afternoon I kissed my girl goodbye like I had been doing. And I head for work like I always did, and job I really liked going to. And I got thirsty again about the same place, pulled into my favorite watering hole, bellied up to the bar, and ordered up those shots of Cuervo and those Bud Backs. And to this day, I don't know what was different on that day from the day before, except for 24 hours, because I didn't hate the job I was going to. And I didn't love my daughter any less on that day than I love her today. one of my favorite stories in the book is about Fred the accountant, because, you know, he wasn't having a bad weekend. Business was great for him that weekend. He wasn't in pain or having emotional trauma or anything like that. Everything went great for him. And yet when he picked up that drink, his weekend got away from him completely. And he had just experienced the first nip of the ringer. And so I'm sitting on the bar stool this one afternoon. I kissed my girl goodbye. I was sitting on the bar stool, drinking those same drinks, and getting, you know, thinking I got to get up and go to work, and sitting there. And after I've had a couple, then, you know, I don't know what was different on this day, but 24 hours. Cause you know, the thought that I needed to get up off the bar stool and head out and go pour drinks for everybody at a job I really, really like going to was just enough that day to overcome the phenomenon of craving that happens once I start to drink. Nor was the knowledge that my little girl, the most important person in the world to me, I would have told you, but little, not even 4 years old yet, sitting at home, the knowledge that she was sitting at home, waiting for as long as she could till her mommy got home that night, wasn't enough to overcome the phenomenon of craving that happens once I start to drink. So I sat on the bar stool that afternoon and I lost them both in one fell swoop. The kid and the job were gone. And I stayed and I lived off the kindness of strangers there in that little area until I found another job in another dive bar. And, you know, I love this next little beautiful little understatement that Bill writes. And I know that no matter where we come from, what our background is, our political leanings or our religion, we all know what this means when he says, when we read, gradually things got worse and worse they got. I ended up marrying my drinking partner. I got another job at another dive bar, and my drinking buddy and I got married right about the time we should have split up, and we moved in together. I kept thinking maybe if I made my circumstances look like I thought yours was, put it all together, make it right again, that would do the trick. And all that happened, we became the neighborhood entertainment. We used to settle our arguments with a shotgun. Whoever got to the gun first won. That's how we rolled. And you know, I got my daughter back when she was 8.5, and I didn't get sober till she was almost 10. And when I got her back, you know, here's where I really began to suspect that I might be down for the count, because I know that we've all probably had times where we set out to get drunk. I'm going to party. I'm going to get drunk. No holds barred this weekend. I'm going to get drunk, or today, or whatever it is. But, you know, when I really began to suspect that something might be really, really wrong was when I got her back. And during the week, 5 days a week, I had one job, just one job. And that would be to go pick up my daughter from school, go drive about 10 minutes away, pick up my daughter from school and bring her home. That's the only thing I really had to do. And about 1:45 every afternoon, I'd look at the clock and say, it's time to go get an Amber. And I'd hop in the car and I'd head out over there. And then I'd make a stop at the bar. I'd think I got time. I'm going to hop in there, and I'd order up a drink. And as I started a drink, I'd think I got 45 minutes. I can have one drink, and then maybe two as I drink. And then I have two. And then I'm thinking, you know, I could probably have one more, probably fit one more in there. And then somebody lines up the bar with empty shot glasses, and I can't turn down a free drink. So I'm probably going to have 4 drinks, 4 if I hurry, 5, 6, and then I'm late. And I finally peel myself up off the bar stool and I head out over to the school, and I finally make it in. I have to go into the front office because that's where they keep the kids whose parents can't get there in time. And as I walk in, I'm very aggressive and I'm mad at the staff because I'm late. And as I walk into the office further, then I trip over my own feet and I go rolling across the office floor. And as I do that, I catch a glimpse of my daughter's face and the look in her eye as she watches her mother go rolling across the office floor. And, you know, I feel that sense of powerlessness one more time. Not that I didn't know how I got there, but things weren't going to change. Nothing was going to change. All I needed to do was just to hurry up, get up as fast as I could, act like nothing happened, and get the hell out of there. And, you know, I've experienced a lot of stuff, you know, tied down to beds in 5-point restraints in the mental hospital, and a lot of weird stuff went down on the street and even in the family at home. But I don't believe I've ever experienced pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization quite the way I did when I saw the look in my daughter's eye as she watched her mother go rolling across the office floor that afternoon, and nothing was going to change. And it was another year or so later when I finally got sober. It was one more Saturday afternoon. The cops are in the driveway one more time. The neighbors are watching us one more time. The kids scared to death one more time. When the cops left, they took the gun. The husband left for the last time. It's me and the kid and the booze, and I couldn't stop drinking. And here's where a hard drinker might take a look at their life and say, I'm really tired of this. A hard drinker could say, I've had enough. They could, maybe I even need to go to detox for a week or two. That's a hard drinker. They'd come home, they'd go to work, they'd have a story to tell. If somebody asked them, they would move on with their life. I've seen them do it. They say things like, I couldn't control it, so I had to quit, and they just move on. That is not me. What I did was I just pulled the closer to the couch so I didn't have to keep getting up to get another drink, because I drank through my circumstances. I drank through drug addiction. I drank through homelessness. I drank through the circumstances of my life, and I was getting ready to do it again. My first sponsor told me if I wanted to affect a conscious contact with a power greater than myself, and by the time I got here, I needed a very, very simple place to start. Just simply because I had been meditating. I had done all of these other things. I didn't have any problem with the belief that, or the understanding that some power exists. I had had experiences, but I couldn't sustain them because it came to the point where the alcohol finally had to go, or the rest was just of no consequence at all. We would never get to talking about self unless the alcohol went. So one of the first coincidences, so my sponsor told me if I wanted to affect a conscious contact, I could start by counting the coincidences that happened in my life. Those situations that seemed to fall together for the good of everyone without me having my hands on it. Coincidence with a capital C. And the first one I could count was that I had moved in next door to a woman who had 5 years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. And she had seen and heard that whole deal go down that day. And she came over a couple days later, and she brought me a big book and a 12 and 12. And she just sat on my couch and she told me her story. She was just a woman properly armed with the facts about herself. And she talked about her, and in her story, I heard me. And what's more is that over the last year, I'd seen with my own eyes that she wasn't drinking. And what impressed me more about that was it didn't seem to bother her that she wasn't drinking. And that got my attention. I didn't understand that. All I knew is that when I had no booze and I had no steps or fellowship or God in my understanding, I felt like you stripped the coating off my wires. I felt oversensitive and underloved, and I didn't know what you meant by that or why you looked at me that way. And my self-centered head would close in on me from there. So much so that even though I know a bit about booze by that time, I knew that I couldn't guarantee if I was going to have 2 or 22. I knew that. I didn't know we called it the phenomenon of craving, but I knew that I couldn't control it. I knew that the window of relief had gotten really, really small, 20, 30 good minutes before, God knows what happens. And I also knew that I didn't seem to have to invite trouble anymore. It just seemed to come to visit unsolicited, doesn't it? It just shows up. And so I didn't know how her 12 little thinly veiled Sunday school sentences were going to have any effect on me in the face of what I'd become. They just seemed so weak. I love what Father Tom says. He says, you got to be pretty sick and tired to find us interesting. And I was getting sick. I was getting increasingly interested. And our book talks in terms of saying, we've been beaten into a state of reasonableness. I was finally a little bit more willing to listen, a little bit more ready. Something was happening from the inside out. And it was about a week and a half later. I just didn't go back and buy more booze. I was sitting at home alone. It was a weekend, and my daughter was with her father, and there was no treatment for me to go to anymore. People have been trying to help me with that kind of thing all my life. So I sat at home and I shook it out, and into Monday and into Tuesday. And by Tuesday afternoon, I was stark raving sober, and I went back to my neighbor instead of the store, just followed one little wormhole of grace and right over to her. And for some reason, I was ready. When I asked her what to do, she sent me up to a meeting in Sierra Madre, California, and that became my first home group. I sat way back by the open door and the exit sign just in case. And I heard people talking about big books and sponsorship and rides home and pouring coffee and all of that kind of thing, And, meetings alone don't keep me sober, but it was the gateway. It's where I found out. It's where I found out that something was happening that I didn't know about. and that if I was willing to follow a few simple directions, it could change for me too. I could change. I could come in and have what you had. I heard people talking about that and fourth steps and stuff like that. And then I heard a guy say, "Hey, Joe, how's your lawn?" And I was moved a little bit by that. Like I thought, what? You know, and it occurred to me, my God, could my life ever be so elegant and simple as to be concerned about a lawn? You know, like just like, oh, up until then, my life had been so much about foraging and scraping and holding on. Could it ever be just so simple that sitting on a porch smelling fresh cut grass could just be the way the day went? Wow. And the secretary asked me to read at the end of the meeting that night. I took it from her. I said yes, and I read. And as I read, I came to the room just a little bit more, just like I do every time I come into the room, like I do every time I say yes to something you asked me to do, whether I'm in the room or not. You know, and the difference between all of those other places and everything, but barring my being ready, you know, to listen to a solution. I mean, we're not the only miracle workers, but I needed this particular miracle. Anything I ever learned in any of the places I was ever locked up, I left there when I left. Alcoholics Anonymous is the place that installed something in me that goes with me wherever I go. When the meeting is over, it's with me. It's in me. And we all can have it. If we do these things, we can have it. There is no authority that we have to go to experience theirs secondhand. We get an experience if we do if we take these actions, we get an experience for ourselves. And I'm glad, because I'm a terrible spectator. If I thought that for 32 years I had to sit around and watch you guys get it, and I don't, I'd probably have been long gone. And with that, I better tell you, my sobriety date, September 25th, 1987, you know, so I'm just selfish that way. I couldn't have watched you get it and not me. So I started to take the actions out of desperation and because I needed to. And now I do it because I want to. I like the result. Since I was 9 months sober and the obsession to drink alcohol was finally lifted for me, it hasn't reoccurred for me. And through any of my circumstances, it's never, I'll say it again, there hasn't been a circumstance where I've thought that a drink was going to make any of this any better. And so I kept coming to meetings, and I got a sponsor, and I started taking the steps with her. And the first time through was rough. You know, it just takes a little while to come to trust this process. The first 9 steps bring about this experience that we come to trust, and then we get better at utilizing the tools. You know, it's not just so awkward, and I'm more prone to find out where, you know, where I'm selfish, self-seeking, or dishonest, and all of those, because I'm afraid of losing, afraid of not getting, and then and realizing that when I'm not, to relinquish my grip on how I think things are supposed to be, to stop playing God and just live in God. But it takes time. It took practice. And I made that first round of amends to my family. I heard Jeff talking about this yesterday. For us, there was also a long period of reconstruction ahead. You know, I'd been breaking their hearts for a very, very long time. And I was about 12, 13 years sober when my dad finally, I think, was able to breathe a little deeper and exhale. But at 9 months sober, I made that first round of amends to my family. And to this day, though, there's not one member of my family who'll stand in the doorway and say, "No, please don't go to the meeting." You know, they never do that. They are all just more than happy for me to go. And then other people started asking me to sponsor them. And I got to tell you, the only 5th step I like better than mine is yours. You know, and I know no better way to say this. You know, you draw from me things I didn't know I needed to share, and you share with me things I didn't know I needed to hear. You know, and not just in formal inventories either, but in those little Me Too moments on the way to the meeting and over the phone and over coffee and all that time, those moments that knit us closer together. And so that we know that, you know, this is doable. This is all doable. And that we're not alone, that we're loved, and we don't have to be alone if we don't want to be. But I also have learned, I want to say this too, that being alone doesn't scare me anymore either. I've come to like my company, and that's okay. There's a difference between solitude and isolation. After a couple of years, I'd had you guys, and my daughter didn't have anybody. She was 11 years old. She was starting to come home at all hours of the night, beat up and bloody. If she came home at all, she'd been jumped into a gang. She was an angry kid. First lost her mom to alcoholism, and now she was losing her to AA. And I love this. I'm going to bring you back to the book again. It's where I got it, that a more important demonstration of our principles lies in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. If I'm only doing it in these rooms, I'm only doing it. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a place where we huddle up and lock ourselves in a room and just be okay. It's meant to clean us up so that we can go back out and be citizens of the world at large. And it doesn't wait to say that. It says it on page 19. That's what we're doing here, And so I had to stop going to 2 and 3 meetings a day and go to 1 meeting a day and go to and implement these principles in my home and in my life. But she needed some big help. And so I ended up putting her in a treatment center and she was there for 6 months, and I showed up when they asked me to, and I stayed away when they asked me to. And when she got out, she wanted to live with her dad for a while. And it was for me to shut up about what I thought of him. I found that after all these years, she's really never needed my opinion of her, of her dad, that she has a relationship with him on her own, and she has one with me. And it's been like that for years. When she was 16, she came back home. She had been living with me for a year or so again. And when she was 16, she came home, and she and her boyfriend sat down, and they had a funny look on their face. And I got to tell them they were pregnant, and they nodded. And that was my chance to say that, I'll be here no matter what you decide. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. And so I got to be present at the birth of my first grandson. And that kid just turned 25 and finished his second year of law school, and he's on his way. And the youngest just 19, and he moved out, and he's up in Oregon working and finding his way now in a new life. And my daughter just turned 42 this year. And just a few years ago, I sat with my husband and my mended family, and we watched her collect her master's degree, and she became a social worker on the crisis impact team with the police department. And she's one of those people who goes in the aftermath of things like the Las Vegas shooting and the San Bernardino terrorist act, and helps them begin to put the pieces of their lives back together. That's who she is. And I don't know if she is who she is because or in spite of me, but I know that because of Alcoholics Anonymous, I get to be a privileged witness in her life and in the lives of anyone who wants to be in mine. When I was 5 years sober, I came home one night and from the gym, and I went to bed as usual. And I woke up in the middle of the night to a man standing over my bed with a knife to my neck and his hand over my mouth. And he said, "Don't say a word or I'll cut your head off." And he took the telephone cord and he tied my hand behind my back, and he raped me, and he robbed me that night in my room. And I got to tell you that at 5 years of sobriety, I had a much bigger God than I got here with. I started at a very simple place, and I just allowed that God to get as big as it needed to be in my life. I just call it God for short now. Lots of names for it, but I experienced the power, and I'm deeply rooted. And so I didn't really know what to think, except that I touched base. I touched base with that God. I got to say a prayer for my daughter, that if anything bad happened, if she had to hear some bad news about her mom, that somebody please be with her. And I realized later on it was Alcoholics Anonymous that fit me to have the presence of mind to say a prayer like that, time like that. I wasn't only thinking about me. Of course, I had fight or flight going on there. It was survival time. And he was there for a few hours. And after a little while, I ran for the front door, and my own bolt lock kept me locked in, so I couldn't get out. And we ended up in a little wrestling match. And instead of getting more angry, at some point he dropped the knife and he went out the same window he came in. And it turned out that I knew this guy. I'd actually watched him get sober 30 days before I did. And I watched him get his life, his wife, his kids, and everything back. And then I watched him join the church, leave AA behind. And when he went out like that. And what I chose to learn from that is that while the big book tells us to be quick to see where religious people are right, to make use of what they offer, Alcoholics Anonymous is the place where I learned the terms and conditions of my alcoholism. This is where I learned that I'm not one of those people who can go home after a Sunday sermon or Saturday synagogue or temple or whatever and have a glass of wine. I can't do that. Here's where I learned that. Then I can go out there and worship with everybody. And out there, I'm not somebody who says, "Oh, too bad they don't have what we have." I have to remember that we rent from them, that that they're allowed to own property. So, on top of, they've got spiritual principles at work too, and when we criticize them over, with by a few bad apples, we got to remember that the same thing can happen in Alcoholics Anonymous: spiritual pride and self-righteousness and all of those defects of character that happen in human beings, but the one thing that we do talk about in Alcoholics Anonymous is we take all that spirituality and we aim it right at alcoholism. That's what we're doing here in AA. Then I can go out there and join them. Alcoholics Anonymous has been the launching pad for me to have a real life. And by that, I mean, I'm sober first. It's not, Alcoholics Anonymous is not the only thing I do. It's the first thing I do. My friend Hector says that best, I think, that our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and those about us. And that's a paraphrase, but we ready ourselves to go be of service. Oh my God, how good does it sound to go live in a cave somewhere, not have to deal with anybody? Wow, that sounds really good to me sometimes. I don't miss y'all like some of you miss each other. but and I always like to say the steps drove me back into the fellowship, and the fellowship drives me right back into the steps. But that's a practice and a flow, and most of the time I am in love with it. There was a court trial that followed, and as part of the defense, they had a lot of the guys I'd known years before get up and testify as to who I used to be. And so I had to get a character witness for myself. And by that time, I had been working at a big fancy investment firm downtown Los Angeles. It's a place I never would have walked in the front doors of years before, would have had no business being there. And yet, class by class, task by task, I'm walking shoulder to shoulder with some very accomplished people, and because, undetected. And so the division head there volunteered to come and testify on my behalf. And they told him all about who I used to be. And, when I got to AA, you couldn't use the words Carla and good character in the same sentence. You just couldn't. And now 5 years later, and after some actions and a new attitude, I'm different. And they told him all about who I used to be. And he said, well, she shows up early and she stays late. And she was where she said she was. And see, that's Alcoholics Anonymous speaking for itself. He didn't have to be coached. He just got up and told the truth as he'd experienced it through me. And then it was my turn to testify. And I'm sitting in the witness stand and I'm looking around. And up until then, my sponsor had reminded me, you got to forgive this guy. And I know she's right. I know we're people who can't handle even seemingly justifiable resentments. But the guy had scared me. And at 5 years of sobriety, anger was still my favorite way to respond to fear like that. Anger feels like power. It is power. But when it becomes resentment, then it diminishes my usefulness. It diminishes me. It diminishes my spirit, my ability to connect. So I know, that's unacceptable. I can't do that. And it has to be transformed. But I couldn't do that on my own. So the 7-step prayer became my mantra. It was the nugget prayer that I don't always say set prayers, but this was the nugget that I could come back to. It was the mind text, was the touchstone that I had, the 7-step prayer to bring me through this. And so now I'm sitting in the witness stand and I look out and I see him. And what occurred to me was that those considerations at the top of page 67, where it says, though we didn't like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, are spiritually sick. Oh, he just like me. Oh, hasn't there been a time where I was so out of control that I couldn't stop myself from drinking and doing what I was doing, so much so that I hurt people. I hurt people badly. Wasn't there that time? And couldn't there again be a time that if I were to take a drink, I could be sitting in his very seat, having hurt people, maybe not rape, but something equally as destructive? Or am I right now walking around in my sober life so delusional that I don't even realize that I've stepped on toes? Isn't that possible? And what that did was it brought us back to an equal playing field. That prayer in the back of the book is terrific. It changes me to a point. It's great. It sets me in a new attitude and stuff. But unless that I see that I am just like you, I'm only forgiving from a spiritual hilltop. And that doesn't work for me. It can't happen. Forgiving and praying for you to wish that you'll come up and live up to my standards is just not it. for me. And it slows me down even these days, that prayer in a very large scale like that, in that 10th step that I did during that time of the rape, or as I go throughout my day and I start to criticize or judge somebody else, and I think, wait, am I, could I, have I done what I'm looking at them doing? And to put it in a short way, my friend Larry Peterson used to say, when I would complain to him about something somebody else was doing, he'd say, well, don't forget that that's not going to look any better on you when you're doing it. And you will, or you have, or you could, So anyway, when I bring it back to it's possible for me too, then all of my self-righteousness kind of, dissolves into the ether. I can't afford that. The detective who worked the case came to me after it was over, and he said, I don't know who you were back then. I'm not even sure I want to know, but whatever it is you're doing now, keep doing it, because it seems to be working. And see, that's Alcoholics Anonymous speaking for itself. The man was sentenced to 20 years, and he did 12, and then he did 3. And as far as I know, he's not been able to stay sober or out of prison, but I know it works in prison. I've had the privilege of carrying the message into every place I've ever been locked up, and then prisons and the county jails. And I know that it works. Some of those guys in one prison I was visiting been sober longer than me in a real group. And they walk just as free spiritually inside as we do out here. Not that they wouldn't trade places, but physically. I didn't know it at the time, but after it was over, we found out that the judge had been a recovered alcoholic for many years. And the court reporter was the Al-Anon mother of a woman in my home group. And the people who showed up for that trial were my dad and my sponsor and my sponsees and people from my home group. And never once did anyone in my home group ever say, well, what did you do? Or what were you wearing? Or how did that happen? And that stuff kind of thing used to happen all the time out on the street. And I never said anything. Why? Take a drink, fall down, take a drink, get up, keep walking. Who cares? Who's going to care? Who's going to believe you anyway? And at 5 years sober, you guys gave me the strength and the ability to see myself in a different light, and that I could reach up and ask for help, and that I could testify. And I discovered that I could it was for me to testify, and it was for me to forgive. And that was possible simultaneously, to hold somebody accountable and yet forgive at the same time. And loosen my grip on how I thought it was supposed to go as well. We do the footwork, and the results we leave. I've over that, and that was many, many years ago, and over time I've had big jobs, little jobs, no jobs. Alcoholics Anonymous has simply fit me to live a real life, and a chance I am sure that I wouldn't have had if I was still drinking. I was wishing for death back then. And I'm not even sure I would die if I went right back out. I'm pretty healthy, but man, that scrapey little life, that survival, that's what I'm afraid of. I don't want to live like that anymore, ever. And every morning, my feet at the floor, and I say thank you. And my sponsor reminds me to ask God to grant me the heart of a grateful servant. And that just sounds like joy to me. So I started saying that prayer, and I continue to be joyful in my service. And I always think that I'm not going to be enough, or I'm not going to know the right thing to say or any of that, but I pick up the phone anyway, or I show up and work with somebody anyway, and usually find out that there's always there's always something different than what I think is going to happen. And so showing up is a big deal for me. And I used to think I could blow off a dinner for 2 and not be missed, really. It just didn't seem like but you got to invite me. You got to. I'm not going, but you got to invite me. That's kind of how I felt about everything. So you've given me the ability to be a good wife. And you can ask my husband if that's happening, but I think it's working. And he's my favorite person maybe in the whole world. We both have 1 daughter and 2 grandsons, and our families love each other. And I didn't think that, I was 21 years sober when we finally got together, and I had given up, not even in a desperate or bad way, but just that thinking maybe I'm just not one of those people who's going to have a partnership. And then he and I said yes to service at one time, and we had to go to Arizona to start talking, and we did, and we've never stopped since. And he was actually on a conference this weekend where it was our second one together. And I guess, the power that I call God for short seemed to have to say, well, if they miss each other in Arizona, we'll get them in Tampa. So there's a lot of nostalgia, going on around for us right now personally. And I'm just so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're new and you're uncomfortable, if I can share with you what helped me so much is that if I could get comfortable with being uncomfortable and talk about it to my sponsor and get a couple of pals, where we can truly bitch and moan about life the way it is, and then learn to see it in a different way. We really do. We get a new pair of glasses, and bit by bit by bit. And don't throw away white knuckle sobriety. You're going to hear that, too. White knuckle sobriety is terrible. Yes, it is, but you'll get through it. Don't throw it away. Stay with us till you have that internal experience. And again, I'm going to say this, it's my privilege and my responsibility to take these actions to improve this conscious contact with this power that you introduced me to have access. I continue that in step 10. Step 10 for me is 1 through 9, over and over and over again. And it never stops reminding me what the stakes are. My big book never stops telling me that what's at stake here, if I don't continue to develop this spiritual cushion that stands between me and the first drink, that's eventually what's at stake for me as an alcoholic. And then I improve on that in step 11, and then share it in 12. And oh my God, what a life you've given me. Thank you so much for my life. And thank you for having me here at the Fall Classic. I love you. Thanks so much.